Hi, Vishali.
Hi, Michelle.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. So today I thought we could talk about communicating emotions. It's something
Wow.
that kind of, yeah, something that it's intense, no? It's
Yeah,
got too
that's a
many
heavy
levels,
one.
many layers. I know. I was thinking about that when I thought this, we should talk about this. It came up because it came up so many times on in my sessions this week
Ah,
in
okay.
different ways.
Yeah.
And I just thought that it would be a good topic to talk about and
Yeah.
also just get some of your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, it
so, what,
it's funny that you say it because it did come up in for me this week as well, but not
mm-hmm,
obviously with clients because I'm not seeing
mm-hmm,
clients right now. However, it did come up with my 2-year-old. Uh,
mm-hmm.
and me like pulling my hair out when she's like having a meltdown, and I'm like, try to communicate with me, child. What is it you want to tell me? And I was just like, huh, okay, maybe I should step back here. I mean, she's 2.
Yeah, but it's one of those things, right? That we kind of like it's something that I think is so important for us to learn from the time we are young.
Yeah,
And it's something that I don't think culturally speaking, we are taught that
correct.
as much.
I think,
No?
yeah, completely. I think that was what my thoughts were also initially. I think, before we get to actually communicating emotion, I think it's very important for us to understand what we are feeling first, what the emotion is. And that itself is such a process, right? It's not something that we are taught, like you said. It's not something, it's something that we have to learn. And it's a very like trial and error method because, it's one thing to say that just understand what you're feeling, but like you and I are therapists, so we know. But for someone else to first of all understand what is it that I'm feeling, because I think I'm angry, right? I may be feeling on the surface angry, but actually the emotion could be something completely different, right? Like we talk about like primary and secondary level emotions, what's
Yep.
actual the emotion is. I think so before
Yeah.
getting to even how do I express my emotion, how do I express what I'm feeling in like a communicative, constructive way, it's important for us to first of all understand what is it am I feeling. Have I been able to pinpoint that for myself?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it all comes down to kind of building your emotional vocabulary, right?
Yeah,
And it's so often that, like I was saying, culturally speaking, it's something that needs to be part of the communication of the environment that we grow up in.
hmm,
And very often we don't, at least I know that in my childhood, I don't think anybody often asked me how I was feeling, right? To
hmm,
describe my emotions, put them in words, tell me how I'm feeling. It was a reaction to my behavior
hmm,
rather than to asking me what my emotions were,
right.
right?
Yeah,
And it was only, I think, like through the process of being in the field of psychology, where I think as people as well, we become so introspective
yeah,
that you start trying to kind of identify and label emotions as well,
yeah,
and then be able to kind of communicate the emotions to the people around us. Otherwise, like you were saying, with, for example, like anger, very often people think that because if I'm aggressive, I'm obviously angry,
yeah,
right?
correct,
Or if
correct.
I am crying, I'm obviously sad,
Yeah,
which doesn't have to be the case. Aggression is a behavior, it's not an emotion.
yes,
Crying is a behavior, it's not an emotion. I cry when I'm angry,
yeah, 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 which a
right?
lot of people do.
Yeah,
A lot of
exactly. And
people
a lot
do
of
that.
people also, yeah, a lot of people also get aggressive when they're sad
Yeah,
or when they're
yeah,
feeling helpless.
yeah. Some also get aggressive when they're very happy. They like hit you a lot. They're like, oh my God, I'm so happy. Like, that's also there. So,
That's
we
true.
can't really judge what emotion is. And I think we're not taught, like you said, growing up, we're not taught to identify, first of all, what we are feeling. Second of all, to even express it. And culturally, yes, I don't think, definitely for Asians, but also a lot of other cultures don't really appreciate and don't really encourage talking
Yeah.
about emotions, especially negative emotions, which
Yeah.
we know that it's all the more important to talk about, right? Negative
Mm-hmm.
or positive. I think even positive, I remember growing up, I think it was so difficult for me to pay someone a compliment or even take a
Mm-hmm.
compliment. I don't know why that is. I mean, obviously now, you get better as you grow up, but
Mm.
even positive, I think, but positive is spoken about more, but the negative is just like, nah, well, that's not something that we're going to discuss.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely one of those things. And it's so important to like you were saying, positive emotions as well, right? You can't really, again, you need kind of words to know what emotion you're feeling, because
Mm,
otherwise everybody's just like, huh, I'm happy. I
yeah.
mean, I remember struggling so much initially, when I started my practice, and within, while talking to people and talking to clients, as to how difficult it is to pull emotions out of them. I think over the years I've definitely kind of gotten better at it,
Yeah.
to be able to do it, or even just be able to kind of get them to verbalize it. But I
Yeah.
remember initially just struggling so much, and I would just, be so it would be such a shame. I would feel so frustrated, as well as so
Mm,
kind of, saddened by the fact that there's so many of us who are so clueless as to how we feel. We just know being happy in terms of
yeah.
positive emotions,
Yeah.
right? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm happy. How are you feeling? I think I'm fine. And we think being fine is also an emotion. How are you feeling?
Yes.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
It's such a
Correct.
common response. And then to kind of really push clients to talk about their emotions. But definitely to kind of, to start with being able to build your vocabulary to be able to identify your emotions to begin with.
Yeah.
That is so important. An interesting kind of question, or rather a thought that kind of came up for me while I was talking to a client or in a session with a client this week was, can you empathize
Mm-hmm.
if you aren't very good with identifying your own emotions or acknowledging your own emotions? What do you think?
Ah, okay. Extremely like deep this session must have been.
Yeah, I was a
But
little confused while I was talking to her. Actually, I was just like, this is interesting, because she's also a therapist.
yeah,
um and she was talking about being able to empathize with her clients, but I saw her being quite resistant to kind of acknowledging her own.
right.
So I was very interested by the fact of how an individual is able to empathize if they aren't really too comfortable with acknowledging and staying with their own emotions.
Um, well, first of all, I think there is the human connection. So I think there is some empathy that all of us
Mm,
are definitely just born with, right? Just on a human level, there is
mm,
some form, some level of empathy, I would say. I don't think, it's
mm,
just that I have no idea what you're feeling at all. Maybe it's a very small amount, I would say, maybe like, you know, a very small percentage. Am I able to empathize with you 100% on the same level that you're feeling? I don't think so. I don't think that's definitely possible. Even if I've gone through the same emotion, same circumstance or situation, even then I
mm.
can't be like 100% where you're at.
Yeah.
So I think to start off, there's definitely some level of empathy, but I think, if we put aside the fact that, for a therapist to, kind of go through or feel the same way that the client's feeling, I think that's a completely
Mm,
different discussion. But just for, normal day to day, can I empathize with someone if, it's difficult for me to acknowledge my own emotions? I think to a certain extent, but I think the real, whether it's a therapy session, whether it's a shoulder to, you're lending a ear to someone and someone's, talking about something that they're going through. I think, you know, definitely you're there, you're empathizing, you're trying to, understand and be there and be supportive for this person. But I think when you really sort of dig deep yourself and then
mm,
you sort of connect, I think that connection is, of course, is what
mm,
elevates us as human beings as well, to be able to do
mm,
that. And I think when you do that, there's also like a bond that forms between two individuals, not just, therapist and client, but also as friends, as husband and wife, whatever, in every relationship.
Mm,
So I think,
mm,
yes, you can. I'm not saying you can't. I think so. But I'm saying that if you do allow yourself to acknowledge your own emotion and
mm,
be there in that process with another person, it enriches you, it enriches the other
mhm,
person, and it definitely nourishes that bond. I think if you don't do it,
mm.
you're definitely missing out on a lot, for sure.
Mm, mm. True, true. Definitely, definitely. It's such a huge part of being able to connect with people, right? Empathy and being able to do so when you're able to connect with your own emotions to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I definitely kind of like the word that you use, which is extremely nourishing for the relationship. And I think it definitely is because it just kind of there's an immense level of comfort that comes with being able to do that.
Yes.
And for in-person relationships to know that you feel safe with that person, and to be
Correct.
able to share emotions with that person without being afraid of anything, without
Mm,
being afraid of judgment, or without being afraid of if they're going to be able to understand
mm.
where you're coming from. And that comes, I think, this entire space of being able to be vulnerable. And I think that's an entire like larger topic of
Yes.
conversation that we
Yes.
can have at another
Yeah,
time.
but
But
you took the word right out of my mouth. I was just going to say, I think it is vulnerability, right? All of us are
yeah,
just so reluctant to be vulnerable. So you're right. When we put ourselves in a position to be vulnerable with another person, of course that relationship is going to grow and nourish and get add so much value.
absolutely, absolutely. But I think very often what I notice is because people aren't able to identify nuanced emotions,
Mm,
right?
mm,
It's easier to identify intense umbrella
right.
emotions like anger and sadness and frustration and irritation and
Yeah.
and happiness and excitement. It's easier to know how these emotions feel. It's
Correct.
harder to tap into, I think, emotions like inadequacy, or emotions like shame, or emotions
Like
that are, I
jealousy.
think, like jealousy, exactly, envy, jealousy, right? It's so kind of difficult, I think, for people to tap into those nuanced emotions, which is why very often from the space of empathy, people find it easier to empathize on these larger
Yeah.
emotions,
Yeah.
right? Somebody is angry, I'm also going to be angry, let's go and do this, right?
Right.
Somebody is sad, we will all go sit there and we will
Yeah.
cry, right? You're able to connect on on these larger, bigger emotions. But it's so much kind of harder to tap into these feelings of these very, very subtle, nuanced, but extremely important
Yeah.
emotions
Yeah.
that are so hard for even us to acknowledge that exist within us.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's another important part, that even if we know it's there, like maybe there is some part of me that knows that I'm feeling angry, for example, say because I'm envious of something, right?
Yeah.
It's so difficult to acknowledge that to myself, that envy is actually what I'm feeling, or shame is what I'm feeling. And these are emotions that definitely, like you said, are nuanced, but it's something that every human being goes through. But
Yeah.
it's so it's sad that we are told that that is something that is like it's forbidden, or it's something that you
Mm.
shouldn't feel, and if you feel, then you're like a very bad person. But the truth is that we can't be human beings and not go through every single emotion that's there. That's not a life lived at all, first of all, to begin with. And second of all, it is very normal to have all of those emotions. I think that's another thing that is difficult for
Yeah.
people to understand, that it's okay to feel whatever it is you're feeling, no matter
Yeah.
what that feeling is, even if it's shame, it's guilt, it's remorse, it's jealousy, it's envy, all of these bad words or bad emotions, to say,
Yeah.
we all feel them.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely, absolutely. We all feel them, and I kind of, I notice my clients getting very surprised when I have this, psychoeducation type thing that I do with some of my clients when I think they
Yes.
need it. And I talk to them about the limbic system,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I say the limbic system is our emotional brain, and
Right.
we all have it, and it consists of all our emotions, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody says, "Oh, I don't feel this emotion," I really question that answer, saying,
Yeah.
"You don't know you feel it,
Correct.
but trust me, you're feeling it
Yeah.
because you
For
have a
sure.
limbic system. I have a limbic system. We
Yes.
all have a limbic system, and the emotion is coming from there,
Yeah.
right?" So, just kind of going into, so I think, in the aspect of, yes, the importance of identifying our emotions is
Yeah.
extremely important in the process of being able to communicate our
Yeah.
emotions,
Yeah.
right? So, also kind of, well, let me just kind of stick to this question then. So, how do you think what is your perspective on the healthiest way of communicating emotions when you've been able to identify it?
Very good question. I'm glad you asked me that.
Thank you very
So,
much, Mashali. I thought about the questions that I was going
good going.
to ask.
Um, no, but it's good. It's good because I was actually thinking about something that I wanted to bring up, and I was like, oh, I just remember this. It was an
Hmm.
article I read recently, I think by Jules Beck, if I'm not wrong. And she was
Hmm.
interviewing, I forget who she was interviewing, this other psychologist. And he said, and he does a lot of workshops on emotional intelligence, right? Which is basically
Hmm.
the umbrella of what we're discussing right now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so the way he says it, he was saying, look at emotions like data. And that's a good way of understanding it, right? So
Hmm.
if we look at emotions or emotional expression or emotional communication as data, then we become more purposeful about it. So
Hmm.
basically, what I'm saying is that your emotion, what you're expressing to me, is data for me. I'm understanding you through
Hmm.
your emotion, and I get to understand more about you, who you are as a
Hmm.
person, where you're coming from, etc., with emotion. So I think if we look
Hmm.
at emotion as data, and data basically is information. So emoting yourself or expressing yourself is basically helping me understand you better. So
Mhm.
instead of looking at emotion as, oh, emotion is looked at, I feel, with a very negative connotation for some reason, right? Like it's a very it's a
The
very
weakness.
it's a weakness. Exactly. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. It's a
Hmm.
weakness. And to step away and to sort of just understand that it's not, it's just a feeling. And to keep in mind that it's emotion and feeling is what that makes us human. I mean, we consider ourselves to be the superior race. This is the very reason why we are the superior race, because we feel, right? And more than that, because we're cognitive and etc. etc. Everyone knows that, right? But
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons that number one, we feel, and number two, we can express it, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm just thinking of that the dog in Dil Dhadakne Do, right? Where he says, "Insan ye se kyun hai ki they can express themselves, but they don't want to, or they find it so
Mm.
difficult to." Right? He says that,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
that's so true, right? Why, I don't know, why is it
Mm.
so difficult for us to do that? But coming back to your question, I think if we look at, like I was saying, and like the article said, I think that's a good way of looking at it. That when I'm
Mm.
importing something, I'm trying to get you to understand something. Or if I look at the way
Right.
you are expressing yourself to me, I'm getting information from you. I'm understanding, something about you through that emotion that you're trying to express.
Mm.
So I think a good way first, like we discussed, is, when you're trying to understand what you're feeling before you express it, I think that helps a
Mm.
lot. So I think one way of
Mm.
doing that is, it's a very simple thing, but journaling. When I'm feeling
Mm.
a lot of emotions, I think it's very useful to journal. Whatever
Mm.
it is I'm feeling, if I'm able to put it down on paper, I think it helps to understand exactly or zero in on what the actual emotion is. So if I'm
Mm.
writing, I'm feeling angry, this is what happened to me, I'm so frustrated, I'm so pissed off, I'm so this. But as you
Mm.
get writing, you actually come
Mm.
down, or more likely you zero in on the actual emotion that you're feeling. It's not
Right.
anger like we spoke about. It's something else that's, making you angry. So I think
Right.
that's a huge, I mean, it's a very simple tool, but I think it's very useful, purposeful, and it's easy. Anyone can do it anyway, right? We all
Right.
do it.
Right.
So number one was that, right? Like, to just
Mm,
be aware of what, or sort of, take charge and say, this is what I'm feeling, and be sort of aware of it.
mm,
And then
mm,
I think if I communicate with that purpose, I think will
mm,
definitely help.
mm,
I think also another thing
mm,
is keeping in mind a couple of things before, say, for example, I want to have like a really important discussion, with my friend, right, about something
mm,
that I've been feeling. And it's something
mm,
that is going to definitely be, I wouldn't say difficult, but maybe it's
mm,
a not so great conversation to have, right? It's going to be,
mm,
say, okay, difficult for both people involved. Definitely keep in
mm.
mind, where are you having this conversation?
Right.
What are the circumstances? You can't just be like, oh, we're at a bus stop and we're like waiting for the bus and we're just going to discuss this, right? It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
definitely keep in mind what's good for you, what's good for the other person, what
Mm,
time of day, make sure that you've chopped some time out for you and for the other person to sit down and actually have the time to discuss this. It's not like in a
right.
hurry, you've not just randomly thought of it. Actually sit down after you've journaled and you've, made points of what it is that you're feeling, what the emotion is. Make time so that it's easy for both of you, not just for, because you also have to think about the other person who's receiving what you're telling them, right?
Right.
It's not just that person is just sitting and, just hearing you. That person is going to listen, respond, react. So you have to take into
Right.
consideration all of those things. I think that will make a
Yeah.
big difference as well. Is there something
Yeah.
else that you can think of?
Now, just trying to kind of just process a lot of the things that you brought up,
Mm,
right? So,
mm,
in the context of the article that you were talking about
yeah,
with regard to kind of receiving another person's emotion or the expression of their emotions as data. So, you're not kind of therefore, and perceiving it as data. So, you're not kind of seeing it or judging the emotion
correct.
as it being a weakness, but
Yeah,
rather kind of using it as information and data to understand the other person.
yeah,
And therefore, there's a certain level of openness,
yeah,
right? That you already are functioning from in wanting to and being open
yeah,
to understand and to take in the data that the person is giving.
right.
You also, I want to kind of connect it back to what you mentioned at the
Mm,
end of what you were saying, which is
mm,
being careful of the person who's receiving
yeah,
the information, right? And being conscious of them and being conscious of of their mental state
correct.
or the environment that they're in, and being able to communicate yourself in terms of your emotions in a space where they are going to be able to receive it as well.
Yeah,
Now, here's the interesting bit, right? So I
yeah.
think we're talking about the emotions as well and being able to communicate the emotions. So it's so important in the communication process,
Mm,
right? To communicate the emotion and not from the emotion, right?
right.
So
Yes.
so what I mean is somebody will think that they're communicating emotion by yelling and screaming,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And with the language they use,
yeah.
right? So I'm being like, I'm yelling and screaming, so obviously I'm angry,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And you're doing this and you're doing that. This is what's making me angry, yelling and screaming. What is the person who's listening to it hearing? They're
Mm,
hearing only the yelling and screaming. And as a consequence of hearing the yelling and screaming, they're not hearing the emotion,
yeah.
right? They're hearing you statements where there's accusatory statements, they're hearing just loud voices, and the person who's receiving is immediately going to defend themselves.
Mm, mm,
Automatic human behavior, right? We
right.
all, when we feel attacked, will defend,
Mm,
right? It's not specific to only some people. We all will defend ourselves when we are feeling attacked. So
mm,
automatically the receiver, defends themselves and starts, kind of trying to find excuses
mm,
to the
mm,
behavior they're being kind of,
mm.
accused of, or what this person is angry about.
Yeah.
That is where the tricky part of communicating emotions comes in,
Mm,
where it's so important to talk about the emotion and not from it.
yeah.
Telling somebody, hey, I'm angry, right? And these factual things that happen make me angry, right?
Right.
And talking about, so very often in, in I think training therapists, we very repeatedly told about using I statements,
Yeah.
right? Of telling our clients to use statements that have to do with themselves, right? Which
Yes.
is, so when you identify feelings, then you're talking about that feeling and that emotion. And you're
Yes.
saying, I feel this way,
Yeah.
right? When I am in this situation and I feel cornered or I feel helpless when this factual situation happens,
Mm.
right? As
Mm.
compared to, you are always doing this and you
Yes. Yeah.
always do that. And that way, the person is not hearing the helplessness. They're
Yes.
not hearing the feeling cornered. They're just hearing you, and they're going to react to it. And it just, you
Yeah.
completely miss
Yeah.
the entire point.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point that you brought up. That's right. Like, I think it's very difficult. I think, and it actually takes practice. It's not, it's not easy to actually, talk about, when you're trying to express yourself, it's very difficult to say, I feel this way
Yeah.
because of, whatever, whatever. It's like, you make me angry. You make me so frustrated. No, 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 no. It's like,
Automatic. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, completely.
It's
Yeah.
definitely automatic. We're so used to doing that because again, in doing so, we don't put ourselves in vulnerable situations.
Mm. Yeah.
We don't feel vulnerable because we are being attacking. So I'm
Right.
not putting my emotions out there, right?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
am just, telling you what's wrong with you. And you need to just hear the emotion from what I'm expressing. But very interestingly, as well, as much as we kind of talk about healthy communication of emotion by using I statements, and I very often tell my clients as well that when you are communicating in this
Mm.
manner, very rarely will the other person there's no space for the other person who's receiving the
Mm.
information to put you down or to disregard or to justify, right? Somebody can't tell you, you can't feel this,
Yeah.
right? If
Yeah.
you're feeling this way, it's your emotion, you're feeling this way,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
So when you're saying I'm feeling helpless, somebody can't say, you, how dare you feel helpless,
Yeah.
right? That's your emotion, and you're feeling it, and the other person has to listen to that.
Mm.
But at the same time, though, I also, and I know this is true, right? Because I think I've heard my clients talk about it, and I think I also see it happening in my personal life as well.
Mm.
But in spite of doing everything right in terms
Mm.
of communicating emotion,
Mm.
it's still not received well,
Mm.
right?
That's true.
It's still not received well, and you're still feeling like you're saying everything right, you're thinking about everything, you're communicating the emotion, but the person who's hearing it is still being defensive. It's
Mm.
still being just justifying their actions, and you're just like, what just happened? This is
Yeah.
a system that has to work. What's
Yeah.
going on here?
Yeah.
Does it happen to you?
100%. 100. It happens a lot. And I think now with a bit of experience and going over and having to do it with clients, but also in your personal life, in my personal life, there you go. And I, not a you
Mm.
statement. Um, I
Yeah.
think one thing that we understand now is also yes, we spoke about write down your emotions, make a time and a place and all of that to communicate. But I think another thing that's important is also you need to take into account, is the person that you're communicating this to, are they in the same space as you are?
Yeah.
Are they ready to hear
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
And more often than not,
Yeah.
it's the timing that goes wrong. Because, see, I don't know that. A lot of the times I'm just be like, hey, this is bothering me, whatever. I just want to have this conversation with this person.
Yeah.
It's great if that person is in that same space or is able to be open and understand and say, hey, I get it. I understand. Let's kind of talk about this
Yeah.
and work through this. But there are going to be a lot of times where this person's like, and it could just be that he said, yeah, of course, I'll meet you and talk about it or whatever. But maybe this person just had like a long day at work, and he's come back and he's like, what are going on about your emotions and whatever? Yeah, I don't have time and space for this today,
I
which is
know.
completely understandable. Or they're just going through something, and it's not something that you can, keep track of and keep all those things in mind of.
Yeah.
But I think you can
Yeah.
just keep in mind that, as you are ready to communicate, see, you have come to a space where you are ready to communicate what you are feeling. You are ready to put yourself in that vulnerable position. But
Yeah.
what's also important is the person on the other side, are they also in a similar because they also need to be vulnerable to sit and listen,
True.
because it's a difficult conversation. It has a lot of, I don't want to say positive, negative emotions, let's say heavy emotions that's going
Yeah.
to occur, right? So are they
Yeah.
also in a space where they're okay, where they want to deal with it, where they want to talk about it?
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
also very important. I think that's what happens where the timing is off,
Yeah. Yeah.
then you're like, "Ugh, hello, I did my work. I'm here. I'm doing what I'm
Yeah.
supposed to be. This is the
I
right
know.
way. But what is this response I'm getting? Yeah, what is this?"
You can tick all those boxes, but you're still going to, you're still going to miss the target, right? And you're right. It's so important for the other person to also be in a space where they're open to hear it, and they're open to sit with that emotion, and they're willing to respond to it.
Yeah.
And right. And I
And
think that is so kind of interesting. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, and I just want to add, and I think that's if you've done all your homework and you're there and you're communicating effectively, and if the other person's not taking it, then another thing that we all use is just pause or take a break. That's another thing that
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to do. When you're in the middle of an argument, more often than not, or even
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
discussion, right? You don't
Yeah.
want to take a pause, and I think that's like the easiest thing to do, but also the most difficult thing to do, because you're like in the moment, no, you just want to say what you want to say. But
Yeah.
oftentimes it's that simple pause or break that can actually make such a big difference, where you just say, hey, it's fine, let me just take 5. Like, for example, like I've sent like a stinker email, I've typed it all out with full anger and all that, and I'll be like, okay, wait, let me like give it a couple of hours.
Yeah.
I'll pause, come back and read it. 100% you're not sending that email. You're like, let me
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
change this and send it. So that
Yeah.
that itself makes such a big difference.
That's true. And I think there you're kind of talking about, about reacting from the emotion rather than about
Correct.
the emotion, right? For you
Correct.
to pause allows you to process the emotion and then find a way to talk about how you're feeling rather than reacting and talking
Yes.
from it. But
Yeah.
I think at the same time, though, I do want to kind of put this in there before we start kind of coming to a close,
Mm.
is I think it's also you can't always tell if the person who's receiving, and who you are communicating to is going to be in a place to
Yeah.
receive the
Of
emotion.
course. Of course.
However, I don't think that it should stop one from expressing.
Agreed.
Right? I think expressing emotions is extremely important, and expressing emotions and communicating emotions always and is best to communicate without any expectations,
Correct.
right? To remember that you're doing this for you,
Yeah.
not to get a reaction or a response from somebody else, because you can't control, right? You
Right.
cannot control how somebody communicates. You can or how somebody kind of receives information. You can't control what their response is going to be.
Correct.
But it's important to express,
Yeah.
right? It's
100%.
extremely
Yeah.
important to express.
Yeah.
So what I would say is, in just kind of in closing to what
Yeah.
we're kind of talking about communicating emotions, is that yes, important to identify emotions. So I would say that there are a lot of emotion lists, emotion wheels, and multiple kind of resources out there to build your emotional vocabulary,
Yes. 100%.
right? So work towards building emotional vocabulary. In doing so, you're able to put a word and label and identify the emotions that you're experiencing.
Yes.
In doing that, you're one step closer to being willing to acknowledge the emotion.
Yes.
Then from there, be able to communicate that emotion to somebody, and like I said, communicate about the emotion rather than from the emotion,
Mm.
and communicate without any expectations
Yeah.
of how it's going to be received or what the other person is going to say. As long as you're sticking to those boxes that I said, you're kind of ticking off, and
Yeah.
you're using I
Yeah.
statements, you're talking about your emotions,
Yes.
you're doing it right. You might not get the ideal response. Most often than not, you won't get the ideal
Yeah.
response. But trust that you have communicated in the healthiest way possible.
Yes.
And it shouldn't take you away from doing it again the next time around, and
Right.
the next time around, and the next time around, because you have to keep doing it. And at some point, the person will be willing and able to, and they'll be in the right space to receive and to hear your emotions and to listen to you.
Yeah, 100%. And this is one of those things, it's a skill. So practice makes perfect. The more you do it,
Exactly.
the better it will get. So definitely it
Yeah.
shouldn't let someone stop from expressing themselves, but in fact, it should only encourage you to keep doing it as much as you can,
Absolutely.
so that, you know, you get to a place where you're able to do it better, and also the other person is able to receive it better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that was a really interesting discussion
Yeah,
there, Mishali.
that was
Yeah.
that was a
And
good chat.
yeah. And I think it was interesting to kind of get your perspective and hear kind of, you that communicating emotions, it starts from 2 years old,
That's
right?
right. That's right. It does.
So that's that's when you got to start building your child's emotional vocabulary.
That's right.
Right, and best to kind of start talking about your emotions to help them build that vocabulary. So yeah, so that's it for today.